There are nights that pass quietly into history, and then there are nights that history refuses to forget. Nights that carry so much emotion, so much sacrifice, and so much faith that centuries later people still speak about them with tears in their eyes. The night of Ashura was one of those nights. A night unlike any other. A night when a small group of believers stood on the edge of destiny. A night when mothers looked at their children knowing tomorrow could be their last day together. A night when sisters sat beside their brothers, wishing time would stop. A night when fathers held their daughters a little closer. A night when warriors prepared for a battle they knew they could not win in numbers, yet they never doubted that they had already won in the sight of Allah. As darkness settled over the plains of Karbala, silence covered the desert. The stars shone above. The wind moved gently through the tents. But inside those tents, hearts were full. Some hearts were filled with prayer, some with courage, some with sadness, and all of them with faith, because everyone knew that when the sun would rise, nothing would ever be the same again. This is the story of the final night before Ashura, the night that changed history forever. The ninth night of Muharram had arrived. The desert of Karbala stood silent beneath the dark sky. On one side was a massive army, thousands of soldiers, thousands of weapons, thousands of men ready for battle. And on the other side a small camp, a handful of loyal companions, a family, children, women, and a leader whose name would echo through history forever. Imam Hussain, Raw. But what is truly remarkable is not what happened on the battlefield the next day. What is remarkable is what happened during this night. Because while armies normally spend the night sharpening swords and preparing strategies, the camp of Imam Hussain spent the night worshipping Allah. Imagine that scene. The enemy camp was preparing for war, but the camp of Hussein was preparing to meet Allah. From every tent came the sound of Quran recitation. From every corner came whispers of dua. Men stood in prayer, heads bowed in sujood, eyes filled with tears, hearts connected to their Creator. It was as if the entire camp had transformed into a place of worship, a place where fear had no power, a place where faith was stronger than death itself. Those who witnessed that night later described hearing beautiful sounds of worship coming from the tents. The camp glowed not because of lamps, but because of faith. Because when people truly trust Allah, darkness can never overcome them. As the night continued, Imam Hussain moved from tent to tent, checking on everyone, speaking to his companions, comforting his family, encouraging the believers around him. Think about that. Tomorrow he would face unimaginable hardship. Tomorrow he would lose people he loved. Tomorrow he himself would face martyrdom. Yet tonight he was concerned about others. That is the nature of true leadership. A true leader thinks about his people before thinking about himself. And that is exactly what Imam Hussain did. He visited the tents. He spoke with kindness. He reminded everyone of Allah. And he prepared their hearts for what was coming. Not with fear, but with faith. Because faith has the power to turn fear into courage and uncertainty into peace. Later that night, Imam Hussain gathered his companions, the loyal men who had stood beside him through every difficulty, the men who knew exactly what awaited them the next day. The atmosphere was emotional. Everyone understood the seriousness of the situation. The enemy army was enormous. Their own numbers were very small. From a worldly perspective, the outcome seemed obvious. But Imam Hussain wanted to give every companion a choice that would reveal the greatness of their character. He stood before them and spoke with honesty. He told them that the enemy wanted him. The enemy's conflict was with him, not with them. Then he said something extraordinary. He gave every one of them permission to leave. No blame, no shame, no guilt. He told them that under the cover of darkness they could depart safely. They were free, free to save their lives, free to return to their families, free to walk away. Imagine hearing those words. The door to safety had just been opened. The door to survival stood before them. But what happened next would become one of the most inspiring moments in history. Not one companion left. Not one history has witnessed many armies, many warriors, many alliances, but loyalty like this is rare. One after another, the companions stood and spoke, each one expressing unwavering commitment. They told Imam Hussain that they would never abandon him. Not tonight, not tomorrow, Not ever. Some said, if we were given life again and again, we would still choose to stand beside you. Others declared that death alongside truth was better than life alongside falsehood. These were not empty words. These were people who knew exactly what awaited them. They knew they would likely die the next day, yet they remained firm. Because they understood something that many people forget. Life is temporary, truth is eternal, and there comes a moment in every generation when people must decide what matters more: comfort or principle, safety or truth. The companions of Imam Hussain made their choice, and history never forgot it. Many narrations describe a moving moment during that gathering. It is said that Imam Hussain wanted to remove every possible obstacle that might prevent someone from leaving. Even the obstacle of embarrassment, because sometimes people stay not out of conviction, but because they are afraid of what others might think. So, according to famous reports, the lights were dimmed. The darkness gave everyone privacy. Anyone who wished to leave could do so unnoticed. No questions, no judgment, no shame. But when the light returned, everyone was still there. Every companion, every supporter, every believer. No one had moved. No one had abandoned him. No one had chosen safety over loyalty. At that moment, the greatness of those companions became clear. They were not following a man because it was easy. They were following truth because it was right. And there is a difference between those two things. Many people stand with truth when it is popular. Very few stand with truth when it is costly. The companions of Imam Hussain stood firm when the price was everything. While these conversations were taking place among the companions, different emotions were unfolding inside the family tents. The women of the household understood the reality of what was coming. The children sensed that something important was happening. The atmosphere was heavy with emotion. Every moment felt precious. Every conversation carried meaning. Every glance felt unforgettable. Among those present was Lady Zainab, a woman whose strength would later become one of the most remarkable examples of patience in Islamic history. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. She knew great trials awaited. Yet she remained steadfast, strong, faithful, patient, because the people of that camp had learned something powerful. When Allah is with you, even the hardest trial can become bearable. And when faith lives in the heart, even the darkest night can contain light. The night was still young. The prayers continued. The companions remained loyal. The family remained steadfast. But elsewhere in Karbala, a man named Hurr was fighting a battle inside his own heart. A battle more difficult than any fought with swords. A battle between worldly power and Inca. Eternal truth, and before the night would end, his life would change forever. The night of Ashura continued to unfold over the plains of Karbala. The desert remained silent. The stars watched from above. The tents of Imam Hussain, R.R., were illuminated by worship, patience, and unwavering faith. But not every battle that night was taking place on a battlefield. Some battles were happening inside hearts. And among the most powerful stories of that night was the story of a man named Hurr. A man who would prove that no matter how far a person has gone, the door of repentance remains open until the very last moment. Hurr ibn Yazid had once been one of the respected commanders in the opposing army. He was the same man who had intercepted Imam Hussein's caravan on its journey. The same man who had prevented Imam Hussain from continuing freely. The same man whose actions had contributed to the events that led everyone to Karbala. Yet despite standing on the side of the enemy army, Hurr was not an evil man. Deep inside, his conscience was alive. And sometimes a living conscience can become the loudest voice a person ever hears. That night, while soldiers around him prepared for battle, Hurr could not find peace. Something was troubling him. Something was disturbing his heart. He walked restlessly. His thoughts raced. His mind replayed every event that had brought him to this moment. Tomorrow, swords would be drawn. Tomorrow, blood would be spilled. Tomorrow, a decision would become irreversible. And Hurr began asking himself a question that changed everything. Am I standing on the right side? Many people go through life avoiding difficult questions. Questions that challenge their choices. Questions that expose uncomfortable truths. Questions that demand courage. But eventually there comes a moment when truth stands directly in front of a person. A moment when excuses no longer work. A moment when the heart knows what is right. That moment had arrived for Hurr. The more he reflected, the more he realized what was happening. On one side stood worldly power. On the other side stood truth. On one side stood authority. On the other side stood righteousness. On one side stood temporary gain. On the other side stood eternal honor, and suddenly the choice became clear. But clarity does not always make decisions easy, because choosing truth often requires sacrifice. And sacrifice was exactly what awaited her. As the hours passed, his anxiety increased. His son noticed. Others noticed. The brave commander who once appeared confident now looked troubled, because his heart was at war with itself. Every step felt heavy. Every moment brought him closer to a choice that could cost him everything. Yet sometimes losing everything for Allah is the beginning of gaining everything that truly matters. Finally, Hurr could no longer ignore the truth. He mounted his horse. He turned away from the camp he had served, and he rode toward Imam Hussain. Imagine that moment. The desert night, the silence, the uncertainty. A man riding toward the camp of those he had once opposed, not knowing how he would be received, not knowing whether he would be forgiven, not knowing one thing with absolute certainty. He had to choose the truth as Hurr approached. His heart was filled with regret. He knew his actions had played a role in bringing Imam Hussain and his family to Karbala. He knew the pain that had followed. He knew the burden he carried. Many people in his position would have expected rejection. Many would have expected anger. Many would have expected punishment. But Imam Hussain was not like ordinary people. The people of faith understand mercy. The people of faith understand forgiveness. 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 Dignity. Not rejection, but compassion. Not hatred, but mercy. It was a moment that revealed the true character of Imam Hussain, because greatness is not shown by how we treat friends. Greatness is shown by how we treat those who seek forgiveness. And that night, Imam Hussain showed the world what mercy looks like. The name Hurr itself means free. And on that night, he finally became truly free. Free from fear. Free from worldly pressure. Free from the chains of status and power. Free from choosing comfort over truth. Many people think freedom means doing whatever you want. But real freedom is much deeper. Real freedom is having the courage to do what is right even when it is difficult. Real freedom is refusing to sell your values for temporary benefits. Real freedom is standing for truth even when the crowd stands against you. That night, Hurr became a symbol of that freedom. A reminder that no person's story is finished until their final breath. A reminder that Allah's mercy is greater than our mistakes. While Hurr wrestled with his conscience, inside the tents another kind of struggle was taking place. The struggle of mothers. History often remembers warriors, but behind every warrior stands a mother. And the mothers of Karbala displayed extraordinary faith. Imagine being a mother on that night, knowing what tomorrow might bring, knowing your beloved child could be among those who would sacrifice everything. The natural instinct of every mother is to protect her child, to keep them safe, to shield them from danger. But the mothers of Karbala understood something profound. Life itself belongs to Allah. And when Allah calls upon people to stand for truth, faith demands courage. Their hearts were full of emotion, their eyes filled with tears. Yet their trust in Allah remained unshaken, because they knew that martyrdom in the path of truth is not a loss, it is an honor. Among those present was the young Qasim ibn Hassan, Aba'a, a youth whose bravery would inspire generations. Like many young people, he looked toward the future. But unlike most young people, he knew his future might only be hours away. At some point, he asked Imam Hussain a question that reflected both innocence and courage. He wanted to know whether he too would be among those who would sacrifice their lives the next day. Imagine a young person asking such a question, not asking how to escape, not asking how to survive, but asking whether he would have the honor of standing for truth. This was the spirit that filled the camp of Karbala, a spirit built on faith, a spirit built on conviction, a spirit built on certainty that pleasing Allah matters more than preserving comfort. And that spirit transformed ordinary people into extraordinary examples. As we listen to these events centuries later, it is easy to think of Karbala as simply a historical story. But Karbala is much more than history. It is a mirror, because every generation faces its own tests. Every generation faces moments when truth becomes uncomfortable. Every generation faces choices between principles and convenience. Most of us will never stand on a battlefield like Karbala, but we will face battles of honesty, battles of integrity, battles of faith, battles of character. And in those moments, the people of Karbala teach us what courage looks like. Not courage without fear, but courage despite fear. Not strength without pain, but strength despite pain. Not faith without hardship, but faith that survives hardship. As the hours passed, the camp remained awake. Some recited Quran, some stood in prayer, some reflected quietly, others spent precious moments with family members they loved. The night was slipping away, minute by minute, hour by hour, closer and closer to dawn, closer and closer to destiny. Yet, despite knowing what awaited them, there was no panic, no chaos, no despair, only faith. Because when a person places complete trust in Allah, fear loses its power. And that trust was visible everywhere in the camp of Imam Hussain. The world would soon witness one of the greatest sacrifices in history. But before that sacrifice came a night filled with worship, loyalty, courage, repentance, and hope. A night whose lessons still inspire hearts today. As dawn approaches, emotional farewells begin inside the tents of Karbala. A father and daughter share precious moments. A sister prepares for unimaginable trials. And the family of Imam Hussain faces the reality that tomorrow will change everything. The most emotional chapters of the story are yet to come. The night was slowly coming to an end. The stars still hung over Karbala. The desert wind continued to move gently through the camp. But something had changed. Everyone could feel it. Dawn was getting closer. The final hours of the night of Ashura had arrived. Every passing moment was precious. Every conversation carried meaning. Every glance seemed unforgettable. Because the people in those tents knew that by the next evening, their lives and the course of history would be forever changed. Among the most touching scenes of that night were the moments shared between Imam Hussain R.A. and his beloved daughter Sakina. A child sees the world differently. Children do not understand politics. They do not understand battles. They do not understand armies and power struggles. But they understand love. And they understand when something feels different. Sakina loved her father deeply. She found comfort in his presence. His voice calmed her fears. His embrace made the world feel safe. And on that night, perhaps more than any other night, she wanted to remain close to him. Imagine the emotions of a father who knows what tomorrow holds. Imagine looking at your child, knowing that difficult days are ahead. Imagine wanting to protect them from pain, while knowing that some trials cannot be avoided. This was the burden carried by Imam Hussain. Yet even in that moment he remained gentle, patient, loving, compassionate, the way righteous fathers always strive to be. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that are never spoken directly. The hardest goodbyes are hidden inside ordinary conversations. A smile that lasts a little longer, a hug that feels different, a look that silently says everything words cannot express. Throughout the camp that night, similar moments unfolded. Parents looked at their children, brothers looked at their sisters, friends looked at one another. No one knew exactly what tomorrow would bring, but everyone understood that the future was uncertain. And so they cherished every moment Allah had given them. This is one of the lessons of Karbala. Never take your loved ones for granted. Never assume there will always be another opportunity to express gratitude. Never delay kindness, because time is one of Allah's greatest blessings. And none of us know how much of it remains. Among all the remarkable figures of Karbala, few demonstrated strength like Lady Zainab. History often remembers physical courage, but emotional courage can be just as powerful. And Lady Zainab possessed both. She knew the challenges that lay ahead. She understood the dangers. She could see the reality unfolding before her eyes. Yet she remained composed. Faith anchored her heart. Trust in Allah gave her strength. And love for truth gave her purpose. Many people appear strong when life is easy, but true strength is revealed during hardship. True strength appears when tears fill the eyes, but faith remains firm. True strength appears when the heart is broken, but trust in Allah remains unshaken. That was the strength of Lady Zainab, and that is why her example continues to inspire people centuries later. The young men in the camp also spent that night preparing themselves, not for glory, not for fame, not for worldly success, but for sacrifice. Among them were individuals whose names would become symbols of courage and devotion. Yet what made them extraordinary was not merely their bravery, it was their sincerity. They understood why they were standing beside Imam Hussain. They were not motivated by wealth. They were not motivated by power. They were motivated by conviction. They believed that truth deserved support regardless of the cost. And that belief gave them a strength that no army could destroy. Because when faith takes root in the heart, physical strength becomes secondary.
The strongest people are often those whose hearts are connected to Allah. As the night continued, another scene unfolded inside the camp. A mother looked toward her infant child, Ali Asghar, just 6 months old, too young to understand the events around him, too young to understand conflict, too young to understand the trials approaching. And yet his name would become one of the most emotional parts of the story of Karbala. Imagine the heart of a mother on that night, holding her child close, listening to his breathing, looking at his innocent face, wondering what tomorrow might bring. Every parent understands this feeling, the desire to protect, the desire to shield, the desire to keep their child safe from harm. Yet even in the midst of uncertainty, the families of Karbala placed their trust in Allah. Because faith does not mean the absence of emotion. Faith means trusting Allah despite emotion. Faith means believing in Allah's wisdom even when the future is hidden from us. As midnight passed and the final portion of the night approached, worship intensified. Many companions continued standing in prayer. Others recited the Quran. Some raised their hands in dua. Others quietly reflected upon their lives. What is remarkable is that fear did not dominate the atmosphere. Worship did. The camp felt less like a military encampment and more like a gathering of believers preparing to meet their Lord. The sounds of Quran echoed softly, words of remembrance filled the air, and every act of worship carried special meaning, because everyone understood that tomorrow could be their final day in this world. That awareness transformed every prayer, every dua, every moment. It is easy to worship when life feels comfortable. It is much harder to worship when facing uncertainty. Yet the people of Karbala worshipped with sincerity even in the most difficult circumstances. And that sincerity became part of their legacy. As darkness covered Karbala, two very different worlds existed side by side. One camp possessed overwhelming numbers, the other possessed unwavering faith. One camp relied on military power, the other relied on trust in Allah. One camp sought worldly victory, the other sought divine pleasure. History often teaches us that numbers determine outcomes, but Karbala teaches a deeper lesson. True success is not measured only by what happens in this world. True success is measured by faithfulness to truth. By that standard, the people of Karbala achieved a victory that continues to inspire hearts more than 13 centuries later. Empires rose and fell, kings came and went, armies disappeared. But the message of Karbala remained, because truth has a power that outlives every worldly force. The sky slowly began to change. The darkness started to fade. The first signs of dawn appeared on the horizon. The night of Ashura was nearing its end. The final hours had arrived. For many in the camp, this would be their last sunrise. Yet there was no regret, no hesitation, no turning back. Only faith, only conviction, only trust in Allah. And perhaps that is one of the greatest lessons we can learn from Karbala. The people of Karbala were not fearless because they were certain of survival. They were fearless because they were certain of their purpose. Purpose gives strength. Faith gives courage. Trust in Allah gives peace. And all three could be found in abundance within the camp of Imam Hussain. More than 13 centuries have passed since that night. The world has changed. Nations have changed. Technology has changed. But the human heart remains the same. We still face choices between truth and falsehood. We still face tests of patience. We still face moments that require courage. And that is why the story of Karbala remains relevant. It is not merely a story about the past. It is a lesson for every generation. A reminder that standing for truth is never easy. A reminder that faith requires sacrifice. A reminder that dignity is worth protecting. And a reminder that Allah never abandons those who remain sincere. The sun is now beginning to rise over Karbala. The night of Ashura has come to an end. The day of Ashura is about to begin. The companions are ready. The family is ready. Imam Hussain Ara is ready. And the world is about to witness one of the most powerful examples of faith, sacrifice, patience and courage in human history. The sun began to rise over the plains of Karbala. A new day had arrived. But this was not an ordinary day. This was the 10th of Muharram. The day of Ashura, a day that would be remembered generation after generation. A day that would leave a mark upon the hearts of believers until the end of time. As the first rays of sunlight touched the desert sand, the camp of Imam Hussain, Ara awoke for what many knew could be their final morning in this world. The air felt different. The atmosphere was heavy. The silence carried meaning. The reality of the moment had arrived. The long night of worship was over. Now came the test. Before anything else, Imam Hussain outright turned his attention toward Allah, because that is what righteous people do. Before facing the world, they turn to their Creator. Before confronting challenges, they seek strength from Allah. The companions gathered, prayers were offered, supplications were made, hearts remained calm despite the danger surrounding them. Think about that. An army stood before them, thousands against a small group. The odds seemed impossible. Yet fear did not dominate their hearts. Faith did, because people who trust Allah understand something powerful. Victory is not always measured by survival. Sometimes victory is measured by remaining true to your principles. And on that morning, every person in the camp of Imam Hussain had already achieved that victory. Even at this stage, Imam Hussain sought peace. He did not seek conflict. He did not seek bloodshed. He did not seek war. Again and again, he reminded people of truth. Again and again, he called them toward justice. Again and again, he tried to prevent unnecessary violence. Because righteous leaders never desire war. They desire guidance. They desire reconciliation. They desire what is right. But there are moments in history when truth is forced to stand against falsehood. And Karbala became one of those moments. The choices had been made. The sides had been chosen. The time for decision had passed. Now came the time for sacrifice. One by one, the companions of Imam Hussain stepped forward. Not because they hoped to survive. Not because they expected worldly rewards. But because they loved Allah. Because they believed in truth. Because they refused to abandon righteousness. Imagine the courage required for such a moment. Knowing the odds, knowing the outcome, knowing that death may be only moments away, yet walking forward without hesitation. This was not ordinary bravery. This was faith in its purest form. History remembers many warriors, but the companions of Karbala became symbols of loyalty because they remained steadfast when everything seemed lost. And one after another, they fulfilled their commitment. The commitment they had made during the night of Ashura, the commitment they had made to truth. As the day progressed, members of the family also stepped forward. These were not strangers. These were beloved sons, beloved nephews, beloved brothers, beloved relatives. Every departure carried emotion. Every farewell carried pain. Every sacrifice left a mark upon the hearts of those who remained. Yet what is remarkable is the patience displayed throughout those moments. Patience rooted in faith. Patience rooted in trust. Patience rooted in certainty that Allah sees every sacrifice made for His sake. And that certainty gave strength even in the midst of grief. Among the most moving scenes were those involving the young men of the family. Young individuals with dreams. Young individuals with hopes. Young individuals who could have chosen comfort. Yet they chose principle. They chose honor. They chose faith. Because they understood something many people spend their entire lives trying to learn. A meaningful life is not measured by length alone. It is measured by purpose. And their purpose was clear: to stand with truth, to support righteousness, to remain loyal until the very end. Their courage became one of the defining lessons of Karbala. A lesson that continues to inspire young Muslims around the world today. As the day continued, Imam Hussain witnessed sacrifice after sacrifice. Friends departed, relatives departed, loved ones departed. Each loss carried pain, each farewell tested the heart. Yet he remained steadfast, patient, trusting in Allah, because true patience is not the absence of sorrow. And Imam Hussain demonstrated that patience in a way that continues to inspire hearts centuries later. Every parent can understand the pain of seeing loved ones suffer. Every parent can understand the desire to protect their children. And yet Imam Hussain continued to place his trust in Allah throughout every trial. As the hours passed, Karbala became more than an event. It became a message that echoed beyond the battlefield, a message that crossed centuries, a message that reached people far beyond that desert. The message was simple: truth matters, justice matters, faith matters, integrity matters, and some values are worth sacrificing for. Karbala teaches us that dignity should never be sold for comfort, that principles should never be abandoned for convenience, that faith should remain firm even when circumstances become difficult. These lessons are as relevant today as they were on that day. Many people believed that the events of Karbala would end there, that the story would disappear, that time would erase its memory. But the opposite happened. The message survived. The lesson survived. The inspiration survived. Generation after generation continued remembering Karbala. Because while armies can control land, they cannot control truth. While power can influence people temporarily, it cannot erase sincerity. And while worldly victories eventually fade, moral victories continue to inspire. That is why Karbala remains alive in the hearts of millions. Not because of numbers, not because of politics, but because of principles. As we reflect upon these events today, we should ask ourselves an important question. What does Karbala mean for us? Most of us will never stand on a battlefield. Most of us will never face the exact challenges faced by the people of Karbala. But we all face choices. Choices between honesty and dishonesty, between courage and fear, between integrity and compromise, between truth and falsehood. And every time we choose what is right despite difficulty, we carry a small part of the spirit of Karbala. Every time we remain patient during hardship, we carry a small part of the spirit of Karbala. Every time we trust Allah during uncertainty, we carry a small part of the spirit of Karbala. That is why the story continues to matter, because it reminds us how believers should respond when tested, with faith, with patience, with courage, and with unwavering trust in Allah. More than 13 centuries have passed since the sands of Karbala witnessed these events. Yet the lessons remain alive, the courage remains alive, the sacrifice remains alive, and the message remains alive. May Allah allow us to learn from the sincerity of Imam Hussain, the loyalty of his companions, the patience of his family, and the courage displayed on the day of Ashura. May He fill our hearts with faith. May He strengthen us during our own trials, and may He guide us to stand for truth with wisdom, sincerity, and dignity. Because that is the legacy of Karbala. A legacy not of despair but of faith, not of defeat but of moral victory, not of darkness but of light. And that is why the story of Karbala will never be forgotten.